Darren Brooks, Associate Professor in the Interior Design Program, has been working on Sheila Bridges' visit for over a year. In addition to numerous accomplishments, Darren is this year's Kane College of the Arts Teacher of the Year, and he'll be joining Ms. Bridges on stage for a lively discussion about her work. This evening's guest, Sheila Bridges, earned degrees from Brown University and Parsons School of Design. In addition to her success as an interior designer, she also hosted her own television show and started Sheila Bridges Home, Inc. to produce her own line of furniture and things like this incredibly cool tunic that I am wearing, which I love. She has written 2 books, Furnishing Forward, published in 2002, and The Bald Mermaid, a memoir, which was published in 2013. She's been named America's Best Interior Designer by CNN and Time Magazine, and her work has been featured in every design magazine there is. Like Sheila herself, her design aesthetic is smart, colorful, funny, innovative, and completely original. So without further ado, please help me welcome Sheila Bridges and Darren Brooks.
Hello, everybody.
We're thrilled that you could join us in the performance hall. Sheila, we welcome you. You mark the 24th interior designer that we have brought to Utah State, and it is with such joy to have a designer of your caliber come and work with us, and we've had such a rich semester. It was an adventure. For those of you who don't know, I always start the semester with a little bit of a surprise. So as students entered my residential studio, I told them to be prepared for a guest, and the guest was Sheila. And we did a Skype interview and began designing a second home for Sheila. And it has been quite an adventure, and we've had a wonderful day of discussion and student projects. So welcome to Logan, welcome to Utah State.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So if we twitch, it's because we have these microphones on.
Yes. It's like having a third eye or something.
I said, let's just pretend we are backup singers. Right?
Yes.
So if we start to shake and like we rock, that's why. You mention in your book The Bald Mermaid, which is, this is hysterical. You laugh and you cry. I was sitting on the sofa, and my husband Stephen walked into the living room, and he said, "Why are you laughing and crying at the same time?" And I said, "It's because of this amazing journey and book. It's such an amazing commentary on design and Sheila's experiences." So in your book, you are convinced that half of the world secretly wants to be a decorator, something of which I agree. When did you first think of becoming a designer?
Well, I don't think at that point I knew that I wanted to be a designer, although my parents probably would beg to differ. According to my mother particularly, I used to love to rearrange the furniture in my bedroom. My parents had the same house for 50-some years, and so I only have known one home since I was brought home from the hospital, and I had the same room, until we sold my parents' house a couple of years ago. So I did constantly rearrange the furniture in my bedroom. So I don't know, maybe that was a sign that it was destined to be. I think I was really inspired to become a designer when I studied abroad. My junior year of college, I studied in Rome, Italy, and I think just being exposed for the first time to just design, Italy and design are sort of synonymous, and I think that's kind of what originally kind of inspired me and made me think, this is something that I would like to do.
Your background was initially in sociology at Brown. How has that influenced your mindset of design?
Well, sociology is, really this sort of study of society and social norms and behaviors and social structure and people. And I think design is really informed by culture, which is very similar. When I was at Brown, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do when I graduated. At that point, I was not confident about being a designer. I thought, maybe with a sociology degree, I'll become a lawyer. But I was always really interested by the arts, and I kept trying to figure out a way to marry business and the arts, and there just weren't a lot of professions that I knew of where you could, sort of be in business but also be very creative at the same time. So that's kind of what started the journey.
Many think that we as interior designers have the most fun, glamorous careers. You brilliantly address this in your chapter of your book called Fluffy Clouds. How do we better inform the world of what designers actually do?
Well, I think it's very hard because we wear so many hats as designers. We do design and space plan, but we also sort of play. At least for me, psychologist. I'm also the trucker. I'm sometimes the housekeeper, the art critic. Our jobs are really comprehensive, and I don't think most people don't realize how many different skill sets you actually need to be a successful designer. It's not just about doing CAD drawings for a client or installing, furniture in their home. There's just so much more about it, particularly if you do residential design, because it's so incredibly personal. The relationship that you actually have with your clients and the learning curve to understand what it is they want or how they want to live, in their homes.
Can you bring us through a typical day?
Well, one of the things I love about design is that there isn't really a typical day. Every day is different. I could spend, one day doing a lot of administrative work and paperwork, which isn't that interesting or exciting, but it is a big part of design. We've talked about this sort of administrative animal that's behind what we do. So, some days I'm working on schedules, which might be a paint schedule or, stone and tile schedule for a client. The next day or later on in the day, I might be at a job site, checking out, radiant floors that are going in, or somebody's pouring concrete for somebody's new house that's starting. And then, the next day I might be on an airplane going to Europe to go to a furniture fair or an art show on behalf of a client that's interested in making purchases. So it's really interesting. And for me, I need that kind of continual sort of stimulation in different ways. It's what makes me still excited about being a designer after 30 years.
How do you deal with those curveballs like you address when you get the phone call that the sofa won't go in the elevator?
I think, I've learned over the years that, every problem can be solved, I think particularly in design. So, you just have to do what you need to do to solve the problem. I think the most important thing is maybe not sharing a lot of that information with your client. How we sometimes get things done, the client isn't aware of. But we're pretty much willing to do whatever it takes to end up with the result that the client, expects from us. So.
Several years back when I designed the 9th floor of the business building, which is the tallest building on campus, the we had measured the sofa several times, and they did go up the stairs.
Because it didn't fit in the elevator.
We did have a very large pizza party upstairs at the end.
Right.
But the dean didn't know I had candles on when she arrived. Everything was in its place. So we are problem solvers at the end of the day.
It happens very, very frequently. Even if, for instance, something won't fit in. I mean, it's one of these businesses that you have to. It's very, very detail oriented, and half an inch can make all the difference in a world. But we always measure, the cab of the elevator cab. It's very important to measure the elevator. That's something that people don't think about. No matter what piece of furniture you're going to have to bring in. So I think you learn that very early on in your career to measure. I don't know if you teach that here in school, but
also the front
measuring
door.
the size of the elevator and the door openings. True.
Did you have a mentor or role model?
I did. The very first design job that I had actually gotten from an advertisement. I applied for a job through the classifieds in the New York Times. There was a position for it was something like small prestigious architectural firm seeks administrative assistant. And I applied for the job, and I was interested in design. I think maybe I had just taken a couple of design classes, and since it was an administrative position, sort of easier to kind of get in the door that way. And I was the only kind of non-architect, I think, in the firm and there was also an office manager and myself. So we were the only two non-architects at the firm. And one of the principals of the firm really became my mentor. And when I made the decision to go back to school full-time, to design school, and got into Parsons, he was extremely supportive of my decision to do that. And I, at the time, I didn't have a computer and couldn't afford to buy a computer, and he actually gave me one of the older computers that they had in their office, and so that I would be able to do my schoolwork or whatever. So yeah, was definitely I would say the closest person to being a mentor throughout the years.
I love your unique ability to bring together so many wonderful things.
I have a lot of things, that's for sure. That's for sure. Yeah, that photograph is in my bedroom, and I love jewelry, which is never, most of it's not expensive jewelry, but I just love to, when I travel, I sort of collect a lot of things, and so I have to find a place for them, like most designers. So I use that mannequin to, is where I store a lot of my necklaces because I don't have enough cabinet space.
I can relate to that. I love this image of you working as well. I think it shows that
I'm willing to get on the floor.
You're willing to get on the floor.
Yeah, well, that's actually pretty typical of if I am doing administrative work. I often sit on the floor, or that's my desk. And my Wheeler, one of my two Australian Shepherds, he stays under my desk all day. And usually, a lot of times, I don't get up from my desk because he's on my feet, and I always feel bad about waking him up. But otherwise, I like to spread out on the floor if I'm just doing regular, administrative paperwork, or also for scheming. But yeah, that's kind of a pretty typical looking day in my office. So
I have to laugh because last night as we were going to bed, Stephen said, "Do you realize how bad it hurts when you trip over one of those carpet samples that you leave on the floor?"
That's funny. No, I clean up at the end of the day for sure.
I try to. What led you to product design?
I think it's probably sort of a natural progression for most designers, certainly interior designers. We do a lot of custom work for clients, and meaning that we design furniture and accessories, various things specifically for those projects. So because, as interior designers, we're always dealing with furniture and accessories, it's, I think just, pretty natural that you move into designing product. For me, a lot of times, designing product has to do with not finding the right object or product for the space. My Harlem Toile, that's, I guess, a photograph of the textile. But originally I designed that because I was looking for a wallpaper for my own home, and I loved toile patterns, but I just never could find any that actually spoke to me personally. So I just decided to design my own, which is what I do a lot of times. If I can't find something, I just design it myself, and I think that's pretty typical of most people in the design profession, is just to create it. If you can't find the right thing, you just find a way to get it made, create it, and make it. So,
what's been your biggest surprise about the Harlem Toile?
I think probably how well it was received when I first designed it several years ago. It started out originally as a wall covering, and then I turned it into sort of fabrics and then products. We have plates and glassware, umbrellas, clothing, and so the collection keeps sort of expanding. I think initially it was also, a lot of people can't afford my design services to hire me as their interior designer. So it was my way of making my designs accessible to just regular people. A lot of the clients I have are very wealthy and can afford to buy kind of anything, but that's not the case for most people. So that's why I, sort of created product so that people, had access to good design that was affordable.
So I've met many designers, interviewed many designers. We've had many here on this stage. You're the only one that I know that has work in a museum. What does that feel like?
Oh, it's such an honor. The Harlem Toile, I think the first museum it was featured in was the Studio Museum in Harlem, New York, but then it now is in the Cooper Hewitt, which is the design museum. This is part of the Smithsonian, but their design museum, which is in New York. My Hudson Valley Toile is in the Brooklyn Museum in their permanent collection, and I've been having talks with with different museums about some other products and various things that I'm doing. But it's been really an honor to know that these things are going to hopefully outlive me. So
It's a real honor and a privilege. It's one of those moments when I think you say, especially sometimes with your parents. I know my parents were very against me going into interior design.
Right. Yeah.
They told me I was to be a doctor.
Right.
And here I am.
Yes. Yeah. I think it was the same for me as well. I think like most parents. I think my parents were just concerned about how I was going to support myself, how I was going to make a living, and going into a more traditional profession, that was going to be more guaranteed. I think once they, saw that I was really passionate about what I was doing, and of course started to have some sort of success, at it, I think then, they were behind me 100%.
What led to or inspired you to design the Hudson Valley Toile?
Well, I think I had already done my Harlem Toile, and since I had a home in the Hudson Valley, and it's someplace that's very special to me and that I spend a lot of time, it sort of just made sense to design the Hudson Valley Toile. For me, the wallpapers are just a medium to work in, sort of artistically, outside of my regular work with clients, and I can be as, political or outrageous or, crazy as I want to be in my wallpaper designs, whether they sell or not, they're not particularly expensive to produce. A lot of both the Harlem Toile and the Hudson Valley Toile are hand screened, so those were more expensive. But again, the technology has changed now, so a lot of the papers that I do now are digital, which allows me to use a lot of different colors, which is something that when you're doing actual screens is really cost prohibitive. But again, I think it's just natural progression for me to just keep designing wallpapers because it's just fun to do.
I think you had Stephen and I in mind when you designed this paper.
Yeah, that might be. Maybe, even though I didn't know you, but yes, it's funny. I guess maybe I was sort of inspired by my next door neighbors, Jeff and Scott, and just sort of the rural farm life and sort of the play on that American Gothic painting, which most people probably recognize or know or familiar with, but thought it might be fun to do with two men instead. So.
We had a lot of fun this morning talking about chickens and farm animals on our ride up to Logan.
That's a great picture. Yeah.
Could you describe your design process?
So my design process, I think, generally starts out the same pretty much with any project. I tend to like to do a lot of research first. I don't know, it makes me feel more confident going into a project is to just learn as much as I possibly can about that project. So it might just be about the architecture of the space that I'm doing or the neighborhood or the client. Once I get a sense of the people who live there, and the way that they live and want to live in their home. And I've sort of gotten over the hurdle of understanding that part. Then I kind of go out and just acquire a lot of things just for sort of inspiration based on that. But it's a process. I think the creative process takes a long time. Sometimes ideas come very, very quickly and easily, and then other times, things take a while. And sometimes, the first idea isn't always the best idea. Sometimes it really takes just, constantly going back and forth and playing around with other ideas, and then suddenly sort of a light bulb goes off. So, yeah, that's sort of how I generally approach most projects.
I have to say I love this bedroom.
I do too, actually. And this was a client's guest bedroom, and they let me they gave me not free reign, but they said, okay, we don't really understand how these, patterns all go together, but since it's our guest room, we'll let you sort of do it. And it turned out to be, one of their favorite rooms in their house. I think people, often get really hemmed in by tradition in terms of, colors and the way things are supposed to go together, and aren't willing to take risks. But people are more willing to take risks in spaces that they're not in a lot. So, a guest room, an entry, a closet, a powder room, spaces they're not really living and staying in all the time. People are willing to usually have a little bit more fun with.
That looks like a room you had fun with.
Yes. Well, that was one of my own spaces. So again, I'm willing to play around with color and pattern and art. I love working with color, and my own homes are sort of my own kind of laboratories, because it doesn't matter if it doesn't turn out well, I can just do it again. And the fun thing about paint is that all you have to do is just get another can of paint and paint it yourself if you have to, if it doesn't turn out right. So,
can you talk a little bit about this room? I think as I went through and your images, this is one of my favorites.
So this room, this was actually a guest. I had a guest cottage on my I used to have a farm, which I sold a couple of years ago, but this was a guest house on my property where I had my farm. And so any of my house guests who would come to stay for the weekend usually would stay in this house. It was a 2-bedroom house. My friends used to call it the boutique hotel because in the kitchen drawers were filled with candy and all kinds of snacks. And so anyway, sort of like a hotel, but without having to pay for it. But so I love pink is one of my favorite colors, and I didn't want this to look super feminine, but so that's why I have a lot of the walls and the cabinetry were painted black, which was sort of grounding. And but it was just, there was something that was very fresh about it, about mixing like the yellow and the pinks. Those doors were actually I found at the flea market, and then I just had a cabinet maker sort of build them into the wall to make it look as though they were original. They sort of went with the style kind of architecturally of the house. But, you know, I love playing around with old things that I find and figuring out a way to incorporate them, you know, into new spaces.
So did people ask who the silhouette was of?
Oh, so the ottoman is actually a silhouette of yours truly. I think maybe in the 3rd grade, our teacher had us do these cutout silhouettes. We had to pose for a photograph and then do these silhouettes. So I had a friend who painted that onto this fabric, and then I upholstered the ottoman in it. So, yeah.
What advice do you have for young designers and artists?
Well, that's a broad sort of question. I think, you know, you have to be really love what you do, I think, to sustain yourself as an artist or a designer. You know, if you're passionate about what you do for a living, I think it really comes through. It shows in your work. I think people are more likely to hire designers or artists or buy their work when they do seem authentic and, you know, as though they love, you know, what they do. At least for me, I think that usually comes across, you know, in my work. I think it's hard. You know, it's hard to. It's a difficult profession. I can't speak to being an artist, but certainly to be a designer, it's a very, very competitive world in design, particularly in a city like New York. So I think you have to, you know, set yourself apart from kind of the rest of the pack, and you do that by being, you know, really, you know, true to yourself and what you believe in, and, you know, trying to express that in your work.
Could you describe the challenges of working with high-profile clients?
I don't know where to start with that. That's it's really hard to work with high-profile clients. I actually don't work with so many high-profile clients anymore. I used to, but I found it really difficult. I don't know if you have ever. I think one of the challenges, it always sounds very glamorous, you know, to work with celebrities, but most celebrities are actually accustomed to getting a lot of things for free because they're celebrities, or very high profile. So if you're not used to having to pay for things, it's sort of hard when you hire a designer and you expect to be paid. So, you know, there's that challenge. I think the other thing for a lot of high profile clients are used to getting things right away. You know, they're used to, you know, saying, I want this now, and they get it now, but the design process is really slow. And if you have things custom made, or, you know, you buy things overseas, or whatever it is, if it's really great quality and customized anyway, things, you know, lead times can be, you know, 16, 20 weeks to have a carpet made. And for a lot of people who have a lot of money, that's sort of unacceptable, the idea that you have to wait so long. So for me, that was always a challenge with a lot of celebrity clientele, was that sort of need for immediate gratification, to have this now. I want this now. And, they can do that in a lot of other aspects of their lives. But, with design, it's a process. It takes a really long time to thoughtfully design someone's space. So, that's probably why I don't work with so many celebrities anymore.
It's interesting when we consider that we, in high-end residential design, provide a luxury service.
Yeah. It's really kind of the luxury goods business, and it's a service, we're in a service industry. It's just a high end, but it's no different than any other, sort of service job.
What do you think excites you the most about the future of interior design?
I think probably the fact that technology is playing such a big part in design, and that all of the disciplines together, there's not this division between all of these sort of disciplines in design so much anymore. At least for me, I'm always excited to do things that involve 3D. I use a lot of graphic designers' works, mixed into our work. And I think the future probably is going to be more of that. The pace of things the pace that things are moving so quickly because of the internet has really changed the design industry. So I don't know, how that's going to affect it, in the next decade. But, now we have the opportunity to really see things, in a way that before we didn't. Technology didn't allow us to be able to actually almost enter a space and see it before it's actually been built. So, I'm excited about that.
One of the things that amazes me about you is you design interiors. Obviously, you write books. Featured on the front of the stage are several of your wall coverings. You're an esteemed author. How do you find balance, and how do you take time to take care of you?
I think that's challenging. It's always challenging if you're an entrepreneur and you have your own business. It's hard to find balance, but I try. I feel like I'm getting better at it. It's one of those things that takes practice. So part of the reason I spend a lot of time in the outdoors and nature is, for me, that's really my downtime. I also, have a home which is out of the country, and that's sort of my escape place. But I have to really almost schedule time away from work, because when you work for yourself, it's easy for it to just take over your life. So that part is still a work in progress, I guess you could say.
You do a lot of travel, and
that's true.
I love to travel as well. How do you go about finding the best places to shop, galleries, best restaurants?
So, I've always loved to travel, and I find a lot of inspiration in travel for my work. I like to get lost. I'm one of those people who won't look at, sort of GPS or my phone. I literally will go to, maybe I'll find out about a neighborhood that's really interesting, that has a lot of galleries or interesting restaurants, and I will just, walk around and sort of get lost. And by doing that, not only do I have to sort of figure it out by the end of the day to get back to wherever I started, but you always just stumble upon all these sort of unexpected places and people and neighborhoods. So I tend not to read a lot of the tourist sort of guides about, places that I should go, or, I might check out a blog or something just to have some general direction. But I think more than anything else, I just like to get lost and kind of immersed in a different culture. And I take a lot of photographs, with my phone. And then, later on I come back to the hotel or when I'm back at home, and I realize that that a lot of those pictures have allowed me to solve a lot of design problems, just when I look through things that have inspired me. I always come back feeling rejuvenated and with new ideas, that I can present to clients.
What's it like being on this having a cocktail on this patio?
Well, I don't know, because my clients have never invited me up there to actually have a cocktail there, but it is a great penthouse, huge. You can't tell in the photographs, but it's a huge penthouse terrace, which has views, just great views. It's a downtown near the village, but yeah. Like I said, I've never been. That's unfortunately that's what goes with the jobs. You install and create these beautiful interiors, but then you're never really invited there to use them. So, yes, this is a house in Santa Barbara that we worked on for 5 years. It's like almost a 20,000 square foot house, which was built from the ground up. So it was a big, big project, but really enjoyable.
I'm amazed at your use of color and sensitivity to, I think, tranquility in many of your spaces.
Yeah, I love working with color and pattern, and but I try, certainly in bedrooms, like this bedroom, which is kind of this green, muted green color. I try to use colors that are very soothing in bedrooms, in spaces that people spend a lot of time in. I personally love a lot of pattern and vibrant color for myself, but I realize most people don't love that. So with my clients, I'm a lot more restrained than I am when I'm designing, for myself. So it's a little more fun to design for myself because I get to do whatever I want.
How does fashion influence your interiors?
Well, I think, design is design. And so for most designers, it doesn't matter what type of design it is. It could be, fashion design or graphics or landscape design. I just sort of incorporate all of them. I love fashion. I started out, my first job out of college was in a training program at Bloomingdale's to become a fashion buyer, which didn't last very long because I hated it. It was horrible. It was great training. I mean, in retrospect, it was a lot of crisis management, but I just, didn't really like being in retail and fashion, but I still, love fashion. It's always fun to sort of also incorporate it into interiors.
I loved this in your book, to see the relationship.
Oh, yeah, that gingham print. Well, I mean, sort of shows that very classic design is sort of timeless, whether, again, it's in fashion or in interiors, that sort of red check is something that it just doesn't really go out of style, so. Yeah, sometimes, some of my projects are very, very contemporary and very quiet. I mean, this kind of looks light blue, but the walls were white in that space. And then other projects, it's a lot of color, a lot of pattern, and much more traditional. So it really, it's really based on the client and their lifestyle and what they want. That's actually a wallpaper. I love working with wallpapers. Just creates another layer of texture and interest, particularly if the architecture isn't particularly interesting. At least in New York, we have a lot of white sheetrock boxes. A lot of homes and apartments just don't have any interesting detail. And whenever I have to work on spaces like that, I usually do use a lot of, this is a grass cloth, but I use a lot of texture and pattern to try to, make up for that.
Tell us a little bit about this photo.
Oh, yeah. I was just in Morocco last month, and I just, again, stumbled onto this store, which was up 3 flights of stairs in a building, and it was this fabulous store, and I can't even think of the name of it, Topolina, I think. But they had all these amazing carpets, which I think is sort of, when people think of Morocco, they think of carpets. So they had these great carpets all over, and just these wonderful patterned upholstery and clothing. I think the designer was French, but the designer of this brand, she was French, but she lives in Morocco, and you definitely could see sort of the influence of that, both with the furniture and the colors and all the patterns. So.
Iceland.
Oh yes, Iceland.
What intrigues you about Iceland?
So, Iceland is a place that I have a home. I renovated my home there a couple of years. It's 2016, and this photo makes me miss Iceland. I need to go back to Iceland. I started going there. I don't know why I was originally intrigued. There's something about the light. I think anybody who's an artist or a photographer or designer, understands about the light there. It's like another planet. It really does. For me, it's kind of my escape place that I go when I have time to sort of get away from New York. It's also, everyone thinks it's really far. It sounds far, but from New York, it's actually about the same time. Probably takes me less time to fly to Iceland than it took to fly to Utah from New York. So it's actually very close if you live on the East Coast. So I started going here a few years ago and then bought a home there. And I don't know, it's just such an interesting place. It's so different than New York. In every regard. I like that it's such a feminist country. They had their first female president or prime minister when I was still in high school. It's just a very, very interesting place. It's a very safe place. In the summers when it's light 24/7, I can go horseback riding at midnight, and it's a great place. It's really my special escape place. So a lot of the colors are inspired by Iceland, by the water, by the black sand beaches. But I take a lot of the inspiration for me for my work is really through nature, and nature has the best color palettes. Anytime you can't think of a color scheme or how to combine colors, you just have to look at nature, and to me the problem is then again solved. Oh, my puppies, who are not puppies, they're 9 years old now, but they were just Wheeler's bigger than his sister, and he likes to use her as a pillow. But the good news is now, 9 years later, she usually uses him as a pillow, so it's fine. So yeah, I've always had a obsession, I guess, with horses since I was little, and started riding when I was very young. And my grandparents, my mother's family, were from Virginia, and I used to spend a lot of time on a farm in the summer, and I think that's probably where I first got interested in horses. And Iceland, horses are a big part of the culture there, the Icelandic horses, which are really great animals. They're very small, but they're very sturdy and very smart and friendly, and they can stay out in conditions like that all winter long. So that's something that I do to relax a lot, is to ride. So
as a foodie, what's your favorite thing to eat when you're there?
In Iceland? Well, the two things that are very popular are fish, of course, because it's an island in the middle of the North Atlantic, and lamb stew. But I'm not a big meat eater, so not so much lamb, but lots of fish, I guess. Fish stew, I guess. Yes, my colorful little bedroom. Yeah, I just love to, again, with my own spaces, I can have fun, and, things don't have to be expensive. I think I bought those pillows on like 1 Kings Lane, and then I painted this bright, sunny yellow, which made me think of the summertime there. And that, once again, I have this thing about deer heads or stag heads, fake ones anyway, so that one's made of wood that I bought in like San Francisco or something. But most of the things in my home there are from Iceland. Usually I try to buy a lot of art from Icelandic artists, and it's just an eclectic mix of things that I enjoy.
So this lecture series, Communitas, invokes the fundamental spirit of community, and it is with the spirit of the Department of Art and Design that presented a year-long series, which has been so amazing and so incredible. I was telling Sheila, I remember those early meetings with Dr. Gelfand and her vision behind the importance of this. This series, Communitas, in the Year of the Arts, has included great artists, scholars, historians, and designers, including Angela Davis, Carrie Mae Weems, Arena D'Souza, and now you're the final speaker in this amazing year. What advice do you have for our USU students about people who are different, diversity, equality, and inclusion?
I think that it is essential to, be open to people who are different from yourselves. I think, certainly in the design profession, it's a very elitist profession, and there's not a lot of diversity, and there's not a lot of inclusion. So I think, generally we are stronger when we include people who are different from ourselves. Whenever we solve problems, I think when you have a more diverse team of people solving them, the results are much better than they are when everybody is the same. I mean, if you, as students, have to do a school project and everybody on your team has the same skill set or, the exact same background, you're not challenged really in any significant way, or at least I don't think you are. So it's usually people who are different from yourselves, who have different skill sets, who help to challenge you. So, to that end, in terms of diversity, I think, again, the same thing stands. People who are different from you bring different things, different experiences to the table that, can only help you to be stronger in terms of what you do. I think people need to, sort of cast, assumptions, sort of aside and fears aside. And I think fear holds people back from reaching out to people who are different from themselves. But the end result, at least in my estimation, or at least in my experience, is always is better when it's inclusive of people who are different, who are different from me, or and I think that certainly our profession of design, needs a lot of work to make that happen. We have to start including people, certainly more people who look like me, in this, community of artists and designers going forward, because it makes all of us, it makes all of us stronger, it makes all of us better. So, I would say to, maybe get to know someone who's a little bit different than yourself, and, make an effort to do that, because I think you probably could gain a lot and learn a lot, from that experience.
maybe my final question is, what do you think your impact has been on interior design?
Well, I don't know that I don't know how much impact I've had on interior design. I would say that interior design has had tremendous impact on me. It's really changed me as a person. I think I'm certainly a better listener, from being an interior designer. I'm definitely much more thoughtful. I think I'm more empathetic. There's all these strange skill sets that are part of being a designer that you're not aware of until you actually are sort of in the profession. And so I would say that by being a designer, it's really influenced me in sort of a bigger way than I've sort of, I think, impacted design.
I think we have time for a few questions. Maybe if we can bring up the house lights.
Oh, I see.
We see an arm midway back.
I can't see a lot with these lights here, but.
Sheila, how do you, in a field where there's many men, contractors, architects, engineers, how do you stand up for yourself as a woman and an interior designer to, so they don't dismiss you, and so, it gets done how you want it to be?
I think that's a great question. It's definitely a challenge being a woman in the profession, but if I look around the room and as many young women as I see, I think probably going forward we won't have as much to worry about because there's certainly strength in numbers. I think, again, for me, it's always been very important having the technical sort of skill set and knowledge and the educational sort of background in design because it makes me feel confident in my job. And I think that basically, if you know what you're doing, then you shouldn't really have a tremendous issue with contractors or other, architects or designers just because you're a woman. I think it's challenging, being a woman, probably in most professions. I think people make a lot of assumptions about women, certainly in positions of power, women who run their own businesses. We get called a certain word when we are, assertive rather than, people like to call us aggressive, but we're being assertive if you sort of speak up for yourself. But it's one of those things that you sort of have to do in order to, carve out a career. And I think the more frequently you do it and get comfortable, with your voice, people start to respect you for it. I mean, there are always going to be people who might have an issue with it, but it doesn't matter. You just have to keep sort of moving forward towards whatever goal it is you have professionally, and not get sidetracked by people that aren't comfortable necessarily, working with a woman or a person of color. That's their problem. That's not your problem.
Another question?
Everybody's.
So when you meet with a client for the first time, what types of questions do you like to ask them, and what do you think is probably the most important piece of information to gather from a client before starting the project?
Well, we normally, you ask a lot of questions even before you probably would take a project on, just to see if, first of all, if it's the right fit, for your design firm to work with that client. Some of those questions have to do with budget and very basic sort of things about whether or not they can actually really afford to hire a designer. But sort of beyond that, I think a lot of it just has to do, if you're doing residential design, about how the person really lives and wants to live. Do you entertain a lot? Do you have children? Are your children allowed in every room in your house, or are they only allowed allowed in the family room? What types of furniture do you live with, or what type of style? One of the things I find, a lot of times it's easier for people to identify the things that they don't like rather than what they do like. It's easier for us to sort of point out, oh, I hate, like black leather sofas or modern floor lamps or whatever it is. People are very quick to be able to identify what they don't like. A lot of times what you do like is harder to express, or it's not always tangible. Sometimes it's just, a feeling that you get when you walk into a room, but you can't really pinpoint what it is you like about it. So sometimes my questions are about the things that they don't like. But it's generally, how they sort of see themselves in the space when it's to be finished, how they imagine themselves living in the space and using the space. So there's, kind of a high learning curve when you first start with a client to, fully understand what their lifestyle is and what they need and what they want. And that's why it is a process. It takes a while to figure out, and hopefully, you work with people that will allow you to fully explore what, that process is, because it's very hard, it's such a personal business to really know. And sometimes people don't know themselves even what they want or what they like, and are looking for you to give them some guidance.
I think we have time for one more question. Skylar.
So I think many of us would enjoy having our own firm or company someday. Moonlighting is generally frowned upon in most professions, so how do you recommend making that switch from being an employee to
So when I first started out on my own, I think at some point I got a freelance. I was doing, when you say moonlighting, you mean like freelance or sort of on the side. Most employers aren't really thrilled about that. I think but nowadays it's become more typical. I think the important thing is to be honest about it with whoever you're working with, and letting them know that you have a potential opportunity or a freelance project that you're working on the side. I think as long as people know that you're not working on that during the time of the day that you're being paid by someone else, or you're using their resources towards that. I think most people now our expectations are that people are doing that, as particularly people who are very talented. I recently had we showed a picture earlier of my guest house. There was a summer a few years ago that I had a young woman and her boyfriend rented the house for 2 months in the summer. And she was the creative director of Tory Burch, the fashion company. And at the same time, she had her own fashion label that she was developing called Suno, I think it is. And she eventually left Tory Burch and to pursue her own business at the same time. So I think a lot of companies now realize that in order to keep really good talent, you have to allow people to sometimes pursue other things. So I would say, for me personally, when it's happened, I appreciate when people are honest with me and say that they have an opportunity to work on something, and particularly if they've thought it through, how they're going to, I work on this on the weekends, or maybe I could take, half days on Fridays, things that show me that they're concerned about my business, but also, figuring out a way to still pursue what it is, they're interested in pursuing. How to answer that?
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you for your dialogue conversation. It's been a real pleasure and treat. And Dr. Gelfand, we'll turn the time back to you, since this is the conclusion of our series.